So yeah, thank you everyone for having us today. Cecile and I decided to create this series called Reconnect, basically because we both work on macro trends. We've known each other for years. She's in Paris, I'm in London, and she has more of a focus on lifestyle, myself on fashion. And our cross expertise, we felt, has always really complemented each other. And, you know, this is a really deep time for collaboration. So we're really excited to have you.
Yeah, and so we thought also that this confinement is giving the opportunity to some of us to have time enough to reflect, and we realized that we need really profound changes. And for that, this is why we want to be together, Geraldine and I, and to ask ourselves and yourself too some questions. So first of all, what we see is that because we are all locked down and because we are all at home, we see more and more people rushing on digital. And this will be my first question to Geraldine. Fashion is becoming more and more digital those days. So what is your opinion about that?
I guess, yeah, the main thing is we really have some big ethical considerations in this. I mean, fashion is currently turning to digital solutions to basically solve a lot of problems that we've had for a long time. And it was something that was simmering under the surface for several years, but now the crisis is fast tracking everything. And I would say that, you know, these are amazing tools in terms of designing digitally, prototyping, showcasing fashion collections as well. It's really great. It's going to also enable us to show collections in a really realistic way and solve the waste that is caused when we are potentially prototyping and creating these sales collections or catwalk collections. But, you know, no matter what, the planet simply doesn't have you know, the resources to produce more inventory that can ever be sold. And digital will help me be more efficient. And that's a good sustainable solution here, but it's not the end goal, I think. And I worry at this stage that there's a little bit of a confusion between, you know, digital and the end goal, which is sustainability. And it's normal that we want to rush to solutions because it's called what's called cognitive closure in psychological terms. It's basically our need for certainty and answers. But again, the goal is slowing down consumption.
Yeah, I think it's something that we've seen for years, and now we see it more and more for true. So I think I would like to react to this about the whole idea of slowing down, because I think for me slowing down is something also that is a kind of in opposition also with this rush to digital. So I have the feeling that with the COVID situation, with the what is now called the Great Lockdown, what we see is that in fact a lot of things were already there. You know, it was trends that were already developed, but somehow this lockdown is acting like a photo developer. So it's making more light on all those trends that we have seen for a while. And for sure, slowing down was there for a while, for many years. You know, it started with food quite a while ago in Italy. People were fighting the opening of a McDonald's restaurant, and they thought that they have very good food producers, that they have very good people cooking, and they didn't want to have that McDonald's. So in fact, in 1986, People in Italy, to fight that opening in Roma, they went together and they built up the whole concept of slow food. And now slow food is in, I think, more than 160 countries. So what we see is that slow food is something that is important those days when we are all confined. Maybe some of you realize that, I don't know how is the situation in your own country, but for instance, in France, it's really difficult to find flour in a grocery shop and in supermarket because people are buying it to make bread and to make cakes. And we know that on Pinterest, people are really looking up for a lot of recipe of home baking. So what we see is that it's a continuation of that slow food movement, but we are forced to have it. But it's the way people want to act. We want to do something by themselves, want to be more responsible of what they put inside their own body. Also in opposition of the fact that 1 on 2 human is going to be obese in 10 years from now, which is terrible. So what we have seen with the slow food movement, we have seen it in slow travel. Before the COVID, many people were starting to think about traveling by train instead of traveling by plane, maybe not going so far, maybe just once a year. So slow travel is something. Of course, slow fashion. We have been speaking about slow fashion in opposition to fast fashion for a while. And we know that things are also slowing down in fashion, that more and more people are trying to make things that are more timeless, that are going to last a couple of years, that are well done. We have a lot of small companies and startups here in France that are really doing that. So what we see with this whole idea of slowing down is that really the confinement is putting that under a light, and we see that we are all taking that time where we are forced to slow down, to rethink our life, to go back to basics, to really take a time to reflect on yourself, go much more on a kind of introspective side, and really see what gives sense for me, really, what is meaningful.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, we it's normal that we're really trying to find all the solutions, and I see, you know, even in fashion right now, there's just so many events, so many conversations happening with the leading organizations in fashion who are creating all these talks and these brainstorms. Everyone is sort of in a state of panic, but the problems had been there for a while. The crisis is just highlighting anything that wasn't on really strong foundations already. And you're right, like, to look back at the past, because this reminds me also of how we had the mad cow disease crisis even, and how that fast-tracked us to make organic food more mainstream, especially beginning with organic milk and organic meat, and then everything became more mainstream. But I think, you know, in terms of fashion, like, one of the ways that we could start slowing down is really having the very tough conversation of stopping the seasonal fashion model, which again was the concept that has been going on for a while now in terms of the slow fashion movement. But what is the point of rushing, having all these amazing technologies and really having a great push for innovation if we're not renovating our way of thinking, our philosophy, and really creating a new and good foundation? So, and one of the biggest issues we have in the industry is that our whole commercial format is based on producing many collections a year. So we need to focus less on seasonal deliveries and more on essentials, customizing, repair, craft, community, you know, really focusing on the longevity of a product and a brand becoming a support for community in many ways, and shifting maybe more to experiences and less goods. And that's where I think we can really reclaim a lot our creativity and we have to think long term at this stage for the planet. So everything we do in this time of crisis is critical. It's a bit like the book by Naomi Klein when she talks about the shock doctrine and how some of the biggest changes happens in times of shock, and those follow us for many years to come. So everything we do right now, we have the opportunity to really think it through. And I think it's really an exciting time. It's very challenging, but it's a good time of questioning. And yeah, so no matter what, even with the new digital technologies, they have to fit into a cradle to cradle model where everything that's produced from these digital technologies, even down to the power, the energy powering these machines, goes back into the system and is renewable.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think this is really an interesting point. It's about trying to do more with less. I think also during that lockdown, we are all lucky to be connected by internet. I mean, this is why we are able to do that today with all of you. Would have been very different 20 years ago without Instagram, without Zoom, without finding Massimo Bottura on live doing a recipe in Italy, or a lot of very cool Instagram live or Zoom webinar that you can watch. So, but I think we need maybe to rethink also, because today we would like to focus a bit also on ethic and digital. And
Yeah.
I think that technology today is not really very much inclusive. What we see is that there is no really digital education in school. People are now just starting to be a little aware of the pollution that can be made by digital. They are just starting to be aware that all the data that they are stocking in the clouds are really part of that pollution. Data centers, for instance, are now consuming 80% of energy, which is a lot. But once again, I mean, this internet connection and all the facilitation that internet is giving us is not for everyone. And today, the one that already have the access of internet, many of us, we are very much still in a culture of excess, looking for the new, fastest design devices, trying to love a new gadget and so on. As Geraldine said, it for fashion, it's also an endless road, but it's the same for technology. So maybe we should try to focus more on inclusivity, trying to see how we can give those possibility to more people. I mean, could be in Africa, in India, or also in our own country. And I would like to share with you something that I really love, which is the idea of frugal innovation. This was made popular by a guy named Navi Raju in 2015, so that's about 5 years ago. It's a new way to innovate, to be more flexible, to fix things. In fact, it's more about fixing things than using a lot of stuff. So it's once again, it's this idea of do more with less. I think that digital in the future should be more frugal. Not only the devices we use should last for a longer time, but also the way we consume data and bandwidth also should be more, we should be more careful of that, because it's a superpower that we have in access, with which we can discuss together, with which we can use to have a link with the one we love, and to keep a link to education or to knowledge. So I think in the future it would be interesting to be more frugal and to be much more inclusive with technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more in terms of inclusivity, because if we look at our conversation, which is like how can craft I think you were going to ask me that question, Cecile, but
Yeah.
you know, I'll say it anyways. But how, you know, we talked about how can craft and tech work together for a human-centered future, and that was very much what we wanted to discuss: is how is this inclusive? So how can craft and tech work together? For example, for me, like in the fashion studio, or for a fashion brand, a whole sort of life cycle of fashion clothing in the future. I mean, to me, craftsmanship is the future, no matter what country it is in. And it's a fashion industry that takes care of its workers, that puts its workers at the forefront. One of the core principles of sustainability is not the materials or the resources extracted from the planet. It's how workers are treated. And the truth is that we are having a discussion right now that is potentially elitist, you're right, and we need to include more at the table the embroiderers, the pattern makers, the sewers, the people that really understand clothing in the panels that are discussing this future of fashion that is very digital. I think digital, we need to take the best of it in terms of shifting to more local productions potentially with, you know, I think you'll talk about that a bit also in your own ways to see it in terms of sharing more open source patterns, etc., to be able to produce locally. Also, the pre-order model is really interesting and could fit into that. And it will be more efficient too, because then we're really making items that people really want, and customization will be an amazing solution. And that's where all of the, you know, basically the fashion industry will be able to celebrate craft also through that customization. But yes, there is a massive implication as well ethically, to further to your point, in terms of the workforces and all the skills that we will replace if we migrate completely to digital. We need to address that. What is it going to mean in terms of reskilling, in terms of retraining? And I was thinking, you know, like, you know, does it make you a better designer if you know all of the digital softwares? If you're super versed digitally, I don't think so. And for me, I think the culture around craft and heritage in Japan is an amazing example, because for them, heritage is embracing innovation, and they're really able to maintain their heritage and always embrace innovation. But yeah, and I just want to add one last thing, which is that I think it's a really good time also to include in the conversation people who have nothing to do with fashion: biomimicry experts, biologists, policymakers, philosophers, architects also who are experienced in creating green spaces, sociologists who work also around that. You know, if we're leading the conversations where the same people who were at the heart of the problem, there's a slight disconnect there. That's great if we're all embracing a solution, but we need to also look outside of the box. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the words that that is for me very relevant for the future is, as and Geraldine spoke a bit about it, is the idea of local. I think what we are realizing now that we are locked down, that for many countries the borders are closed, is that we don't have enough local factories. I mean, most of the things that we produce or we grow is grown or produced elsewhere. We are depending a lot from really far away countries, and this is not very sustainable because it needs a lot of transportation and energy to bring back the things. So once again, I think this mega crisis that we are in is just pointing out those problems that we have been seeing for a while. So it's not new. We have been speaking of relocation of factories for already maybe 5-6 years. In France, we have a very beautiful example. It's a company called 1083. So it was founded 7 years ago by a former software engineer. It's in the middle of the country in a small town in France. And the whole idea is that a normal jean that you wear is have been traveling up to 65,000 kilometers to be on yourself before. And so the whole idea of this company is to say, okay, we're going to do that in a very smaller scale. So the jeans that you're going to wear will have been only have 1,000 kilometer maximum, because this is the biggest distance between two cities in France. And so those people are really reproducing things in France. So it means that they are spinning, they are weaving, they are sewing in France. And when the crisis with the COVID started, very quickly they started to do masks because they had all the factory, all the knowledge, all the people, like Geraldine said. It's really about the people that would be able to cut the pattern, that would be able to sew the mask. And I think, and there was really a solidarity around this factory and those people. And it started to be something really important in France, and many small or medium factories that are really born in France are really starting to do these things. So for me, the future is really more with bringing back local factories on a smaller size. It's also the idea maybe also to bring back fab labs, small 3D printing units, so that you can print and you can do the things where they are needed and not use so much transportation. So it's the whole idea of developing an ecosystem, not just one factory isolated, but really kind of ecosystem around the production of the material, the transformation of the material, the distribution of the material. And I think, as Geraldine said it, for me, this crisis is terrible, and it's very violent, and it's very moving, and it's very deep. But it's also a very strong opportunity for us to rethink the model that we have been using for years. And I think the relocalization of factories and of smaller units is something for me that is really super meaningful and a great opportunity for many places and many people.
I think, I mean, I don't know exactly what it's like in the lifestyle industry, but in the fashion industry, what scares me is we've been so focused on low-cost workforce, often in, you know, countries like Bangladesh, China, Vietnam, Ethiopia, that now if we we're pulling away already all the orders. And there's a big outcry at the moment because basically countries like Bangladesh are facing a humanitarian crisis because so many brands are pulling away from paying their orders. That's one of the first things we should fix. I mean, great to rush to digital deliveries, but one of the first things we should fix is create laws in how brands pay their suppliers. For example, when we talk about, you know, the people, I mean, right now it's a racket. You pay only once you're delivered. And it's the same when brands, you know, sell their goods to stores. They only get paid once they deliver the collections. And we need to, it's a whole systems change that we're looking at. And in a way, you know, after the Second World War, we had in America, they had the New Deal. It's like we need a World War scale effort, like a New Deal, like a fashion New Deal, or food, like a global New Deal kind of thing. But
Yeah,
maybe it's,
I think it's time that we are all asking ourselves questions. That's why also we wanted to do something together, Geraldine and I, not to be just one voice, but several voices together. Both our voice, but also your voices, because we think that we all need to come together to be able to build that. And we are all asking ourselves questions, you know. There is a French philosopher named Bruno Latour who did a very interesting essay recently, and he was ending his essay with several questions, like what do we keep? what do we want to change? Very clear. I mean, so I think this is the question that if we are lucky enough to have a roof and time to spend on that, we should address. So what do we want to keep from the normal system that we had before? Is it and what do we want to change? So I think it's the time and the opportunity for all those questions.
Absolutely. I guess we have the time for, we should enter into question time now.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I would just add one little thing quickly to that, which is that I'm sure you experience the same thing. As a futurist, you get interviewed for magazines and everyone is like, what is the next trend? How will this impact the fashion industry? Everyone wants the answers. And I keep saying, I think it might go like that, but this is not a good time to rush into saying what the next trend is. It's a good time to reflect and correct, start thinking what we can correct or change.
Yeah, and especially because we don't have crystal balls, and I think no one professional in the world of prospective can really say what is going to happen, because we know that the situation is complex. The world in which we are living is complex, so we should try to zoom out. To have a global view on everything, try to understand that complexity, try to embrace it. And I think this is why it's a very interesting time to ask deep questions and to make some reflection on it. And I think it's exactly what we are trying to start together with all of you today. So maybe we should
we should go
have
ahead.
A look at the first question.
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead or shall I go ahead?
As you want, I can go ahead. So
I think Maya was the first question. If you go to the top of the chat.
Yeah, I said that it's not a question, it's just a reaction, a true reaction, saying that people in the fashion business are very underpaid, and students also in internship who have to work for free.
I just I thought that could be turned into a question in the sense that, yes, if interns also should be a part of the conversation. The question is more the younger generation who are very uncompromising, very clued in, and this is their future. They should definitely be very much at the table. So that's my answer to that. But yeah, and then Laura, who's actually one of my students, has a nice question about re-education.
Maybe I can answer, not in the UK because I don't know that much about UK, but yeah, for me, re-education is education is the most important subject. And for sure, we miss a lot of things in education, like also digital knowledge, critical thinking, philosophy. I think it's time to go back to humanity, and also at the same time to help people with cooking lessons, with how to fix things. I think people need to be more independent, and this is one of the things that education should bring to people. It's the capacity of thinking by yourself and of doing things by yourself. So I think we should add a lot of things in what is education today, to bring that to people so that they have the tools to be able to react and to navigate in those very cloudy periods.
Yeah, I mean, just to also further, like when months ago I was talking with my dad, and I have a half brother who's only 11, and I said, Daddy, you need to teach him carpentry. You need to teach him things that will make him independent if things get difficult. And this was months ago. And then now he's doing a lot of carpentry with him, because the older generation, my father learned everything. He learned carpentry. I mean, it was very gender-based. Our grandmothers learned how to sew and knit. But these are things that made us independent. And there's something about our human nature that is quite predatorial and cannibalistic when we sort of are so obsessed with innovation and progress that we want to cancel out things that are fine. Like, don't fix it if it ain't broke. And craft is one of those things. So it's about independence. Returning to craft is the power, really, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I do agree absolutely. I think it's be able to have your life in your hands. And I think also this is why so many people are going with DIY and starting to do things by themselves, because you need the contact with material, because we are very much, looking at screen all the day. We don't touch that thing so much. And so we need also to have, like Geraldine said, the power of doing something by ourselves. Shall we move to another question?
Yeah.
So Camila, if some brands start slowing down, won't they lose market? And how can brands survive in a new slowed down system? So Geraldine, do you want to go
Yeah,
first?
this is the $1,000,000 question. And what many people I speak with who are in the sustainability space and don't necessarily come from fashion, some of them come from other industries. And that's also something which had already been happening, which is starting to shift also to a more experience-based model and not just a goods product model, and starting to shift also more towards the secondary industry, towards renting, providing repair, providing services that bring the items back. And you have to remember that fashion now is trying to fix that very question that you're asking, and we don't know exactly what the solution is. But what we do know is that the number of brands that exist, the number of collections that we produce was outsized, unfortunately. And unfortunately, to rip this Band-Aid, it's going to cause a lot of friction. But that's why I always encourage, and this is something I've been writing about, to look at the well-being economy or the degrowth models, because those are economic models that encourage a shift of how we work. So that some of our work is not just towards money, some of our work is towards making, some of our work is towards wellness. And that's why some countries, even like Germany, are creating a universal base income. So fashion cannot fix this problem alone. It has to be a society-based solution, because if we if we don't, part of fixing this problem is creating a society that is not so based on profit. And this is why the crisis we're seeing in fashion is symptomatic of a much bigger crisis, which is the crisis of capitalism and the end of capitalism as we know it, and what's next, really.
Yeah, I think because we can speak about fashion, but it's the same also for product for the house, like who needs one more vase from IKEA or two more coffee cups or whatever. So, I mean, this model of growth, I mean, we are arrive at a kind of peak of consumption. I mean, our house, our flat are full of things we don't use. And I think it's not just by chance that someone like Marie Kondo got so much success. It's also the idea that when you have too many things, those things are starting to own you. You know, there is this idea of having more is not a good solution. So I think we need to have another storytelling, another way of saying things, another way of seeing the world, and also having other value than just growing abundance more and more. And I think in the middle of that confinement, which is really hard, and I myself am very lucky. I know that for some people it's super hard, but for the lucky one, it's also an opportunity to rethink about, what do we need? Do we need more stuff? or do we need more love? Do we need more things around us, or do we need more freedom? So what do we need? So I think it's more a philosophical question somehow.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Camilla, also, you could also look up the limit to growth dilemma, which is on Wikipedia. It was a study that was done in the 70s, and it was requested by the Club of Rome, which is a club that was created in the 50s, that back in the 50s was warning that we were going to face a great climate crisis if we continued at the pace of industrialization that we were. And the limits of growth dilemma predicted what happened in 2019 almost to the T. And so I would encourage you to look back at this, because there's almost so much growth that the planet basically can shoulder. Should we go on to the next question?
Yeah.
And just FYI, everybody, I did add a bit of time on our Zoom session. So for those of you who can stay a bit longer, we did have it scheduled for 40 minutes, but since we have some really great questions here, maybe if we can stay like 10 minutes longer, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So the next
Ella,
Ella,
what trends have been coming during, are there resulting of the crisis? And do you think trends that we are currently seeing in lockdown will carry on past this crisis? Or do you think we will see new trends coming through? I think the things that are happening right now are very important, like social distancing, like taking more care of our body. I think the only thing that are working very well, the only industry that are working very well are products. I mean, for instance, in the beauty era, the number one product is soap. It's not super expensive cream. Which means that everything that is something that you can do from your home, from your nest, is super important now. I think people are realizing that they can do a lot of things from their home. So I would say that everything that is home connected is going to be important. Everything that is connected to sanitizing, cleanness is going to be very important in the future. And I think also the relation that we are going to have between the connection of our body with the others, like going to massage or spa or even doctors, or being close to people in smaller spaces. This is going to be very questioning in the future. So I guess that the longer the lockdown is going to last, the longer those trends are going to be strong when we will go out, because there will be a kind of implementation in our brain and in the way we are thinking and reacting and living our daily life.
Yeah, I mean, I think in fashion, obviously, we were already seeing this type of gamification of fashion with haptics entering clothing so that they could sense your temperature, your heartbeat, etc. And that obviously could be harnessed to fight pandemics. And be able to monitor people's health. But again, I warn of the ethical implications as fashion starts to merge with the tech sector. And we've already seen what a nightmare this is in terms of our privacies. We need to make sure that there are gatekeepers and that we don't fall into the same trappings. So I think to every innovation, to every wonderful thing, there's something that can also be questioned. And the future, it's not like it happens to us. You know, we have an active role to play in it. But I could read the next question. I thought it was interesting, Anna, that you mentioned, you know, how do we get these tough conversations higher up to government level? I mean, it's a very clear point. I'm a bit biased in this, in the sense that I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion Fashion, and so we are very active in writing those tough letters to the British Fashion Council, in observing everything and tracking. And we really, really believe that everything is about having citizens' assemblies. So although we are shying away from linking directly the climate crisis to the coronavirus, even though some scientists do link it. But we are shying away from that because we are worried of the rise of eco-fascism. But basically, yes, you're right. We need to get this. And one thing you could look up is Citizens Assembly. I want to say maybe you can look up Extinction Rebellion if you want to, but obviously I know some people don't want to be a part of that. But yes, we need a very democratic system.
Yeah, and I think things are starting to change right now, for instance, in France, because more and more people, more and more thinkers, philosophers, sociologists are really acting with words, with deep reflection. And I think it's a citizen movement that is really starting to have a louder voice and to say, okay, we need also, now that we are in lockdown, to think about what is going to happen when we're going to be outside again and what we want to change. So I think it's really depending in which country you are living, but there are a lot of groups of people that are really putting their energy together to make their voice more loud by online petition, by acting, by answering and telling loudly all the things that are happening right now that are not good and what we need to change. So I think it's a global citizen reaction. And we can also resist very much with all our daily habits. So it means that if you choose to buy your fruits and vegetables into a big stores, or if you choose to make the effort to buy it from a local producer, if you choose to spend your money on slow fashion instead of fast fashion. So I think also it is by everything, every day that we are buying, that we can act. Not only that, but this is also a way of acting to make things change.
In terms of the resistance or some of the activism that we've seen, especially from the younger generation with Fridays for Future, I think it's only a very short matter of time until we find ways that they will be finding ways of protesting and striking digitally. And that's going to be really interesting. And one thing I'm really excited about in the fashion space is how suppliers are rising in their protests. Factories in Bangladesh, people writing letters saying, how could you cancel the orders? And maybe that goes back to one of the questions about what are the next trends, what are the things we're going to see last. Well, we're seeing a lot of brands right now show good behavior all of a sudden. And what will be key is maintaining that good behavior, because more than ever, people are tracking that. People are saying, how are you supporting my community? Because we're in a time of community building, not a time of material consumption. So like, I think I'm biased in this because I'm an activist. So I'm always trying to find ways of protesting, but
I think all the people that are there are also willing to be active, because otherwise
yeah,
they won't be there. So
yeah.
maybe we jump to, because there was a few questions
There's
by
quite a few
people that
questions
already
coming
have been
through.
asking questions.
Yeah.
So maybe we go to a question by Nanon. From who will frugal, inclusive and sustainable change come? Big leading brands, small companies, starting up, consumer turning into producers? My answer will be from everyone. So it means that I think everyone got a role to play in that piece. So it means the state, the government, the companies, and also us as citizens. So I think it's the power is in the hands of everyone, and so I think everyone needs to make a change, because it's not going to be the state only, it's not going to be the industry only, it's not going to be the citizen only. It's going to merge of those three powers together that can, for me, make a big change.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I don't have the solution. So lately I've just been really diving deep into ideas around biomimicry, and emulating the nature's models and the way nature fixes problems, to see if I can get any ideas. And I think when you say, Manon, the ecology of an economy, maybe you could look at things like biomimicry and study that a bit. I mean, it's a really fascinating subject, and something that many innovators and designers also have used to create really amazingly and efficient products. And this is something we can use in our systems as well. Should I go to the next one? Is there a
Yeah.
future for fashion beyond trends? How fashion could survive if we come back to basics and timeless pieces? I think at the end of the day, fashion has always been about self-expression, and it became a trend thing that, you know, even if we have basics, people are always going to end up personalizing or wanting their own style. It's also kind of a class thing of a signifier of differentiating yourself, or for other people who are more underground, of just still, you know, really self-expressing yourself. That's human behavior. We can't take that away. But the fact is that there is a flattening of trends, and we can't deny it. A yellow has been on trend for how many seasons now? Okay, maybe it's a different shade of yellow, but could we survive with the same yellow? I think we could. Could we survive with the same orange for a whole year? I think we could. But then, you know, maybe there is opportunity to bring in new ideas through, again, through craft, through people relearning to sew, relearning to customize their clothing, or through digital tools and local production, being able to make their own clothing. I mean, after all, it was, you know, up until the 50s, many people were still making their own clothing and going to the tailor, and it's something that is still prevailing in other countries, like in Africa. From, you know, when I've traveled there, seeing the tailors are everywhere. So I think, you know, this trend thing is almost an accessory. It's not the big question at this stage. Somehow it became a thing that was the motor to the fashion industry, but it doesn't really have to be. And it can be something that will evolve around that. And I'm confident there will always be some kind of change in behavior and taste, but we need to think about the bigger picture at this stage.
So maybe we take one more question. So let me see where we were.
Wood had a question. Oh yeah, no, she talked about fashion revolution. Yes, the news. Thank you everyone for the links that you're sharing in the chat. That's really interesting. And when we finish, I will just share a few things that I know are happening next week with fashion revolution, actually. What's the next question then? Should we look specifically, I believe that there's a question from Flavia.
Yes, so what is...
she's saying, I believe that when we think about the increase of the DIY trend, customization and handcrafting of things, we should look especially to the lower classes of developing countries such as Brazil, because the behavior is part of their way of being in the present system. Yeah, that's great. I totally agree. This is not a question though, so we'll move on to Christina, who is also an amazing forecaster and professor that I work with every summer in Barcelona at IED. Christina says, do you think that the desire to be safe and clean will trump the desire to be sustainable in fashion retail as well? Those brands that can afford to have large retail spaces and staff to keep these spaces clean will drive the small boutiques out of business. How does local government help small local businesses stay afloat in times when people fear entering the smaller? That's a very, very good question.
Yeah, I think it really depends from the government, from the business. I'm in contact with people in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a city that is very well known for many restaurants. So now there is a large group of 600 restaurants in Hong Kong that are together to try to speak loudly to the government and also to the landlord to have facility for the renting. And also some of them are trying to go together to build up an alternative solution to the aggregators, people like Uber Eats or so, that are taking a large commission, which means that if you are having a restaurant and if you use those platforms, you hardly earn any money. So I think in different countries and depending in which sectors you are, the answers are very different. But I think some governments are really deeply helping some people, some government less. But I think there is not one answer. It really depends where and which activity. So it's a very large and interesting question, but very hard to quickly answer, if I may say.
Maybe this will be something that architects can help solve in terms of creating an extension of the store, a bit of an outdoor space, maybe at a certain times of the day where people can pick up certain things, or people can come together and volunteer to help set up these online store with some kind of online format so people can pre-order, come pick it up. I mean, I don't know, I'm just trying to think creatively. The main challenge is the space. So architects and urban planners and cities should really come together to fix that issue. I mean, even in, I know this may sound strange, but in places that celebrate the Ramadan, or where it's too hot during the day, sometimes people work at night. Maybe we'll see certain times of the day where maybe a store that is too small indoors can pop out something outside and people
Yeah, I
come,
think
and we're
cities
just
are
going to have to
already
find solutions,
some cities in France are already, like in US, finding solutions, like giving more space for bike lanes. I mean, to try to make a balance between the use of individual car that people want to use instead of public transportation. So I think solutions are going to come. I think we need to close, maybe,
yeah,
and
just
maybe
just really fast.
people are asking when is the next event. So we should say that the next event is next week.
Yeah, so we'll be back on Thursday, not Friday. We'll be back next Thursday at the same time, 3 p.m. London time, 4 p.m.
Paris
Paris
time.
time. And thank you so much for coming. Next week, for those of you interested, the Sustainable Development Goals are hosting events on the 20th and the 21st. Big talks about how to innovate and change the fashion system. Fashion Revolution is also hosting a number of events. So, because you know what? Next week is Earth Day on Wednesday. So, just really get clued in on your Instagram and Google searches. There's a lot going on next week. And thank you everyone for coming. I just want to add that some people have asked if the sessions are replayed. In the past, my previous sessions, which were separated, even though we're sort of co-hosting them, I did repost them for a couple of days on my YouTube. So that's something that we'll keep you posted, because we are replaying them. So we will notify everyone via email and Instagram, obviously, as soon as that's done.
Well, until now, stay all safe and see you soon. Bye.
Have a great weekend and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.